What's up, everyone? Matt Gajewski here, back again talking college basketball. It is Wednesday, March the 5th. Conference tournaments are continuing. Sun Belt Round 2 is today. A few others are tipping off. But on this Wednesday slate, we're highlighted by a couple of premier games up at the top, much like yesterday, where we had a lot of exciting games. Auburn gets upset by Texas A&M, BYU, and Iowa State. Double overtime thriller. There were a lot of results in bubble games that mattered. North Carolina continues their streak as they try to claw back into tournament relevancy. Same thing with Texas. Low-level games also shined a little bit in the Horizon League, but more on all of that in a little bit. We have a big slate up top that we need to break down, and it starts with perhaps the premier game of the week. There's a couple of these. Florida takes on Alabama. This is a game that has a 3.5-point spread in favor of the home Crimson Tide. Total is sky high, 178.5. It's just what you're going to get with Alabama games. Injuries, Florida, just Sam Alexis. He's very deep in the rotation now. Not really anything worth mentioning. Bama's without Latrell Wrightsell, torn ACL, and Darion Reed. He's been out for a while as well. Really good game. Resumes, there's not much to poke holes in with either team. Florida's 3-3 against the top 25. Wins over number 5, Tennessee, number 2, Auburn, Texas A&M. They only have one loss outside the top 25. It was to Georgia in their second most recent game. Crazy game. They actually almost win. They missed a lot of free throws. Just a weird game overall for them. Alabama, they're 5-4 against the top 25, beating Illinois, Houston, Kentucky twice, Texas A&M. They only have 2 losses outside the top 25, and it's to number 26, Ole Miss, and number 33, Oregon. Alabama has the second most difficult schedule in the country. Florida's at 37. So Alabama's been tested a few more times. That's kind of evidence in that record right there. Stylistically, both of these teams play tall lineups. They're both awesome at rebounding. Florida 36th in height. Alabama's 5th. Rebounding, Florida's 12th. Alabama's 15th. Size should be fairly neutral here. From there, Florida, 51st in effective field goal, 90th in three-point percentage. That's mostly remained constant since conference play started, which is not the case with Alabama. As far as their interior scoring, they're 43rd. That's the path of least resistance against Alabama, who kind of has a little pick-your-poison problem on the interior. You can either play Cliff Amore, who's an awesome defender and rim protector, but offers you 0 on offense, so you're limited. Or they can play Diabate, who's the exact opposite, an awesome scorer, but a complete liability on defense. So depending on the roster Alabama chooses to play, there are ways to exploit that. Can Florida do it? I think the answer is probably. When you look at just overall efficiency between the big men on each team, Thomas Howe and Alex Condon have been far more efficient than Amore and Diabate. And I think that largely just comes down to you have complete players in the paint on Florida, and each paint player on Alabama has a weakness. And that doesn't even consider Micah Handlock, then continues to just get his feet under him. One of the best rebounders in the country. We'll see what he provides down the stretch for this team as they approach the tournament. On the Alabama side, they're better at shooting overall, 12th in effective field goal. They're second at interior scoring. Again, that's either Diabate or just guards getting to the rim. It's not like Amore being efficient around the rim. They're 109th in three-point percentage, but that has regressed positively, and it has skyrocketed since January 1st. They're up to 31st nationally since then. Florida is an elite defensive team. They have better defensive numbers, especially when you break it down inside and out compared to this Alabama team. They're top 10 in both interior and perimeter defense. But Alabama does have shooters that could exploit this. Aiden Holloway, 42% from 3. Youngblood's at 38%. Sears still trailing a little bit at 36, but he's climbed to above 38 in conference play, which is positive. They need him to play well. Turnover margin should favor the Gators pretty significantly. Alabama's 180th in turnovers committed, and Florida is 123rd at turnovers forced. So that's certainly an avenue that the Gators could exploit here in this game. I think this comes down to Florida playing up to their potential. They have the slightly worse shooters, but a more complete lineup with their size and how they can space the floor. Alabama is limited in size, especially at the guard position, and their forwards all have some sort of limitation that Florida can exploit. We make this just inside the 3.5 points. closer to just 2 overall. I have a bit of a hesitation backing Florida on the road, especially when they've collapsed in certain games. The game against Georgia was really problematic for me. They still almost win, but they down by 20 points in the first half. Part of the problem was they couldn't hit their free throws, and it's not like Florida's good there. They're 218th in free throw percentage. So they're not a complete team. They have weaknesses. When they're on, they beat teams like Auburn. When they're off, they're going to lose to teams like Georgia, who's actually a very good team. Saw them beat South Carolina last night. But before we continue, I want to thank anyone that supported the channel. Have had a lot of people subscribe, comment, like the videos. It means a lot. If you do want to support or you find this interesting, useful, one way to just support, and it's free, is do any of those things. Like the video, subscribe, leave a comment. It helps a ton, and it is free. So if you're willing to do something small that does help a lot, I would greatly appreciate it. And any of you that have just watched, view time helps a lot. It's not lost on me that you're taking your time to view the channel, so thank you. To the Big Ten, another amazing game up at the top of this conference. It's Maryland taking on Michigan. This game has a 1.5-point spread in favor of Michigan, the home team, a 154 total. No major injuries, just a couple very deep rotational pieces for both teams. And it's been kind of a story of 2 seasons for both teams. We have the highs and the lows. Both of these teams have dropped games of late. Michigan most recently lost at home to Illinois. They got blown out by 20 points. And Maryland, prior to their victory over Penn State, which was, it's Penn State, they did lose a home game to Michigan State themselves. So both of these teams coming off very recent, debilitating home losses, but the resume is still very good for both teams. Maryland's 2-3 against the top 25. Beat Wisconsin at number 10, beat Illinois, who did not have Ivisic in that game, just noteworthy. They have 2 losses outside the top 25, Ohio State at 32, and then Washington at 104. That's the really damning one. Both were on the road, both in conference. Not the craziest losses for Maryland, still a very good body of work. Michigan's also 2-3 against the top 25 with wins over Wisconsin and Purdue. They have 4 losses, and some of these are worse. These are all outside the top 40. Wake Forest at 78, Arkansas at 41, Oklahoma at 45, and Minnesota at 89 in overtime. All of them were on the road. So if we're having 4 losses outside the top 40, some of them are worse than others. Michigan's body of work is a little less complete than Maryland's, but still pretty good overall. Resume-wise, stylistically, Maryland is 79th in height, 45th in rebounding. Michigan's 2nd in height, 30th in rebounding. But these teams have a little different compositions inside. Michigan has better spacing. They're actually taller. They have the pair of 7-footers in Vlad Golden and Danny Wolf, who both can shoot the 3 a little bit. Golden's not shooting as many, but he does have a higher percentage. Wolf has regressed in the last couple games. Makes sense. They've lost some of them. But he'll shoot a lot more threes. Combined, they're at 35%. For 7-footers, that's an awesome shooting percentage. Maryland's just different. First of all, Derek Queen's 6'10", Julian Reese is 6'9", so you will be seeding size. And these guys don't shoot the ball, so you have some different spacing dynamics. They only have 25 three-point attempts combined on the year. So it's a good matchup inside, I think, for Michigan on paper. You don't have to worry as much about spacing the floor if you're a Michigan team. Maryland might have to worry about this. And scoring at the rim could be a problem for them. Both teams are elite defensively. Maryland's 10th overall, Michigan's 17th. On the interior, Maryland is 52nd. Michigan's 26th. On the perimeter, Maryland 39th, Michigan 45th. So it's just an awesome body of work defensively for both teams. I do think Michigan has the advantage scoring inside. They're 22nd in overall effective field goal percentage, 7th at interior scoring. Maryland does have slightly weaker numbers on the interior, which we mentioned, and they are seeding height. So I think you do have a slight advantage for Vlad Golden and Danny Wolf. If that is neutralized, Maryland decides to dedicate extra resources to it. Trey Donaldson and Amari Burnett both hit over 39% of their threes. So Michigan can shoot if needed. Maryland, I think, is going to have to shoot more three-pointers over the Twin Towers rather than try to score at the rim. A lot of their offense does flow through Reese and Queen, which makes sense in most games. This is just a challenging stylistic matchup for them. Maryland is 265th in three-point rate, so they're not shooting a lot of threes. But they're actually very good when they do. 41st at three-point percentage. I would just argue they don't shoot them quite as often as they should. They could maybe play with more balance. And they have good shooters. Selton Miguel, Jacoby Gillespie, both over 41% from three. Rodney Rice not that far behind. But that probably is what this matchup comes down to. How effective are Golden and Wolf inside scoring against Queen and Reese? And then how active are these Maryland shooters? Are we getting more three-pointers instead of Maryland challenging those Twin Towers inside? As far as the turnover game goes, we always need to talk about this with Michigan. They actually did a decent job with their turnovers against Illinois over the weekend, but Illinois forces the fewest turnovers in the conference. Maryland is much different. They're 54th nationally turnovers forced. This is a massive edge, Maryland's direction, and one I'm actually pretty worried about on the Michigan side. The biggest concern peripherally for Maryland is probably just their depth. They do not play a deep lineup. However, they do a great job staying out of foul trouble, so that shouldn't be an issue. It's just when it pops up, it could be particularly debilitating. As far as score goes, we have this projected almost dead even as a pick'em, just the slightest of edges towards Michigan. I have not played this yet. I think we might get some money coming on the home team, Michigan. So I think the plus 1.5 for Maryland might become a +2 a little later in the day, which is just mainly my hesitation. I'm pretty sure I would play the plus 1.5 if forced to. We will see where this comes in, and this will be a play that we discuss in Discord throughout the day. If you're interested, the Discord is a place where we offer projections, lines, spreads, totals, player projections for all the major games. Think your P4, your high majors. Today, there's about 14 of those games. And then we're building a March Madness tool, which hopefully you guys will like as well. But there's no long-term commitments. There's an option for $10 a week, $30 for the month. Could just jump in for March or even the first week of March Madness for some tournament stuff, but that's all available if you'd like to check it out. We'll also be playing more games closer to tip-off. This is a weird time of year. We got bit by this a little bit yesterday, especially in these smaller conferences. Teams that were dead to win the regular season title held out players in an effort to potentially make a run in the whatever tournament they play in and get the auto bid for March Madness. Green Bay did this last night, holding out their best player, Anthony Roy. Didn't matter. Doug Gottlieb still got smashed, but the over came in when we were on the under. The same thing happened in the Detroit game where Geeter hadn't played in a little while. Detroit holds him out in an effort to make a run in the Horizon League tournament. They got smashed, but the over still came in a spot where we were on the under, in part because of some of those injuries. You're going to see players that have been out for a while pop up in some of these low-level conference tournaments with teams trying to make a run. You're also going to deal with motivation concerns in some of these bigger conferences. Example, Auburn yesterday, another one we ended up being on the wrong side of. So taking my medicine a little bit, playing fewer games in the low-level tournaments till we get more information. And that's the thing. In some of the smaller conferences, you will be dealing with incomplete information when these lines are posted at the beginning of the day. Anyway, let's move on to our next game. Tennessee takes on Ole Miss. We're back to the SEC, another huge matchup up at the top of this conference. Tennessee is a 3-point favorite on the road. The total is 138. There are no major injuries in this game. One of my favorites of the day, not just from viewing, but also from a betting perspective. I think there's a lot of edges to potentially exploit. Resume-wise, Tennessee is 6-4 against the top 25. A lot of good non-con wins. Louisville, Illinois. They also beat Florida, Missouri, Texas A&M, and Bama in conference. They have one loss outside the top 25. It came to number 38 Vanderbilt on the road by 1 point. Just a phenomenal body of work for Tennessee. Ole Miss has dropped a little bit. They're 4-5 in the top 25, beating BYU, Louisville, Alabama, and Kentucky. Kentucky did not have Lamont Butler. They have 4 losses outside the top 30. Mississippi State twice, Memphis, and Vanderbilt. None of those are lower than 47. That would be Memphis. So another awesome body of work for Ole Miss. They're just limited. They're going to lose more games overall because of the way they play. They're 269th in effective height, 321st in rebounding. They play one of the smallest lineups in the SEC, and teams have just pounded this. Auburn pounded this inside. Now Auburn's awesome. But you can't play this kind of a small lineup. Vanderbilt has struggled with this at times as well. Tennessee's 49th in effective height, 20th in rebounding. You just walk into this game with a massive advantage on the glass and on the inside. Tennessee does have some issues shooting. They live dangerously. 104th in effective field goal percentage, 131st in three-point. They live and die by Chaz Lanier. He's their one three-point shooter over 40%. When teams take him away, it can get a little greasy for Tennessee. They do have other ways to win. They're awesome defensively. They attack the glass incessantly. So they're not dead if you take away Chaz Lanier, but when he's hitting 40+% of his threes, it certainly helps. Ole Miss is 31st in total defense, but they are 172nd on the interior. Tennessee 105th in offensive scoring on the inside, setting up Milicic, Akpara. These should be the matchups that Tennessee looks to exploit in this game. As far as Ole Miss, they actually are slightly ahead of Tennessee in offensive efficiency, but their shooting numbers are a little inferior, which is weird. They're 132nd in effective field goal, 160th on the interior. Nothing surprising there. But they're 113th in three. And they are living and dying by the three a little bit. That's a huge mismatch in this game. Tennessee is second nationally in three-point defense. Ole Miss is also suffering from some negative regression from Matthew Morrell and Dre Davis. And that sucks because Jalen Murray and Sean Padula are both over 40%. It's just you have Morrell, who's not hurt, or he's not healthy, he's hurt. He's been a negative for this team shooting, and so is Dre Davis. Interestingly, turnover margin does favor Ole Miss. It's not a huge mismatch in this game, but they're third in turnovers committed nationally, 28th in turnovers forced. Tennessee's 119th in turnovers committed. I didn't think they were going to be like first in the country, but Zakai Ziegler handling the ball, you should be better than 119th. I don't know. It's not a huge concern. 119th is not a terrible number. They're above average still. But man, I thought he would be better with the turnover numbers. Finally, fouls have been a huge problem for Ole Miss, not for Tennessee. If you get to the line in this game more often, Tennessee should run away with this one. We make this about 70 to 65.5, which gives you some value on the Tennessee side. Also gives you some value on the under. We played both of these. Played Tennessee minus the 3. Briefly saw that jump to 3.5. It's back down to 3. So you can play this number. It's readily available. And then played an under 139.5 at open, down to 138. As you can see, we're still pretty clearly below that. So this is the top play on the board, and it just so happens that the two top plays we have are both in the same game. Next up, let's stick in the SEC. Missouri takes on Oklahoma. This game has bubble implications, has seeding implications. Missouri is a 4-point favorite on the road. The total in the game is 160.5. Missouri, fresh off a pretty disappointing loss against Vanderbilt. Well, let's talk about that in a little bit. But this game, we have two pretty good body of works. It's also a rematch, our first rematch of the day. They played on February 12th. Missouri won 82-58. They were at home, but they held Oklahoma to 23% from 3, 36% from 2. They crushed the Sooners on the glass, and they forced 17 turnovers. So a very complete performance. Missouri's 3-4 against the top 25. They've beaten Kansas, Florida, and Bama. They do have 4 losses outside the top 30, but none lower than 51 Texas, of course, in the SEC. And I think there's an argument to be made that some of these bottom-end SEC teams are better than the efficiency metrics suggest. Just you beat up on each other. Anyway, Oklahoma has some of the same issues. 2-7 against the top 25 with wins over Arizona and Louisville, and then 3 losses outside the top 40, but they came to Georgia, Texas, and LSU. I think this is nuts. Your lowest losses, you only have 2 outside the top 50, but you have 12 total. And then conversely, you have the non-con wins over 13 Arizona, 24 Louisville, who are at the top of their conferences. SEC is pretty strong is my main takeaway. These teams are going to be very dangerous as underseeded teams in the tournament. If they get there, Oklahoma needs another win at least to get in. And they are ceding advantages, especially in height and on the glass, to Missouri. Missouri's 30th in effective height, 74th in rebounding. Oklahoma 144th in effective height, 242nd in rebounding. I will say Missouri had the same advantage and even drastically more in favor of themselves against Vanderbilt. So Vanderbilt plays the smallest lineup in the SEC. They out-rebounded Missouri 41-28. They also shot 62% from inside the arc. I don't have the answer as to why this occurred, whether it's a motivation thing or Vanderbilt truly had a game plan that exploited this. I don't have the answer. But Missouri did not effectively use their height in a game that projected similarly to this one. Shooting-wise, Missouri is 10th in effective field goal percentage, 23rd in three-point percentage. Oklahoma's not that far behind. 42nd ineffective field goal, 46 from three. Both these teams shoot the ball well from the perimeter. Missouri has multiple three-point shooters over 40%. Caleb Grill has even regressed to 43%. But I still think the path of least resistance is inside should they choose to use it. The Tigers are 18th in two-point percentage. Oklahoma is 322nd in two-point defense. Please just use your bigs, attack the glass, attack the rim as much as you possibly can if you're Missouri. On the other side, Oklahoma should have avenues to shooting the ball over the top. Again, they don't trail Missouri that much in three-point percentage. Duke Miles, Dalton Forsythe, Bryson Gooding all hit over 44% of their threes, and that's a huge number, 44%. Missouri's weakness on defense, if you want to call it that, is defending the three. They're 128th. And lastly, turnovers could be a huge problem for Oklahoma in this game. They're 229th at turnovers committed. Missouri is 28th at turnovers forced. Both teams have problems with fouls, so that's not an advantage one way or the other. But if this does turn into a foul fest, which it could, Oklahoma is over 100 spots better than Missouri from the free throw line, which is weird considering how good Missouri is at shooting threes. We make this very close to the spread and actually show a touch of value on the Oklahoma side. They've been underrated when they're playing at home recently, and it's kind of just because they've taken on water in conference play. Not one I plan to take. It's close. Both these teams can shoot and run away with a game if their opponent is cold. So it's a tricky one to handicap and one I won't likely touch on tonight's slate. But a huge game, one with massive implications that we need to talk about. One I have a little more interest in, Marquette takes on UConn in the Big East. This game is a 3.5-point spread in favor of UConn, a 144 total, no major injuries in the game. It's a rematch. These teams played on February 1st in one of the weirdest games I've seen all year. UConn won 77-69 on the road in Milwaukee. They held Marquette to 32% from three. They shot 63% from three. What a crazy gap. They also annihilated Marquette on the glass, but Marquette annihilated UConn in turnovers. Marquette forced 25 turnovers in this game. Marquette also shot 55% from the free throw line. So, I mean, you talk about this game, it's just outlier performance across the board. Marquette shooting 32%. That's actually maybe not an outlier. They just have been bad shooting threes. But UConn shooting 63%, outlier. Marquette getting dominated on the glass. Not crazy, but this was like a historic domination. Ben Gold has 0 rebounds. More on that in a little bit. And then 25 turnovers is crazy. It's even crazier that the team won turning the ball over 25 times. Anyway, resume-wise, Marquette is 3-2 against the top 25. They have some good wins. They've beaten Maryland, Purdue, and Wisconsin. Maybe Big Ten just a little overrated. This is anecdotal, but at least worth mentioning. 5 losses outside the top 30. They did lose to number 79 Dayton, 44 Xavier, then a couple other Big East teams, maybe worst of which is Villanova at 55. UConn is 2-2 against the top 25. Weirdly, they beat Gonzaga, and then they have a win over Marquette, who's at 23 now. They have 7 losses outside the top 30, and some of these are pretty bad. 95 Colorado, 79 Dayton, 193 Seton Hall. It's just a weird stylistic matchup. Marquette can't rebound. They're 223rd, and that's despite being 74th in height. You basically have a 6'11 center who stands in the corner. He had 0 rebounds in the first game. He's played a little better of late. That's come against weak competition, so I'm hesitant to get all the way back on Ben Gold. We'll see how he does in a more difficult matchup like this. UConn is not small. They're 94th in effective height, 22nd in rebounding. And Hurley, for everything he does well, which is a lot. You can't win 2 national championships being a bad coach. I think one criticism you could have is sometimes he's a little loyal to the guys that stick in his program. In this case, Samson Johnson has recently hit the bench, largely because he can't stop fouling. But Terrace Reed, every time he's on the floor, is just giving you flat out more than Samson Johnson. And it seems that now Hurley has eventually realized that, okay, we need to play Terrace Reed. So I think these numbers that slightly favor Marquette might be a little worrisome. UConn might be playing a taller lineup. They might even be a little ahead of Marquette compared to what the numbers show if Reed plays more. Shooting-wise, Marquette is 109th in effective field goal, 53rd at 2-point percentage, 222nd at 3-point percentage. The 222 at 3-point percentage, but they're taking the 37th most 3-pointers in the country. UConn is 110th in total defense, and they are really bad at defending the three. They're 311th, but this didn't matter that much in the first matchup. Marquette basically on their season average. And just like what happened to Cam Jones and David Joplin? Cam Jones is at 31.5% from three. David Joplin's at 29.7%. And Marquette does have some guys that hypothetically could shoot more threes. Chase Ross, Stevie Mitchell, and Ben Gold actually have decent numbers from the perimeter. But like Stevie and Chase Ross don't shoot many threes. Ben Gold is their third most prolific three-point shooter, but he's still not a creator. He's a spot-up shooter. So it's a weird composition for this Marquette team shooting the ball. UConn is 27th in effective field goal, 11th at interior scoring, 90th in three-point percentage. Marquette is 27th in overall defense, but they have a major weakness inside. They're 210th. We just talked about the increased minutes for Terrace Reed. That doesn't even include like Solo Ball, Caravan, and McNeely. Inside should be a massive advantage for UConn. But like the first game, Marquette's defense is propped up by turnovers. That is a unique mismatch for them most of the time. They're top 5 in turnover margin in the country, forcing a ton of turnovers, never turning it over themselves. UConn is 172nd in turnovers committed. They don't force turnovers either. They're 269th in turnovers forced. I will say I don't think it helps that Hassan Diarra is playing through an injury, their point guard. But man, Marquette needs to capitalize on some of these turnovers, one thing they could not do in the first game. But what I see on the screen is basically you have outliers across the board. What happens when these neutralize? So UConn doesn't shoot 60% from three. Marquette doesn't force 25 turnovers. I think a reasonable projection would be like 15. And then Marquette shoots a little better from the free throw line. I think at the very worst, you have a closer game and likely a game where Marquette wins. Now you head to the road, so that should be factored in. But we do make this with inside the spread. I have interest in playing Marquette at the plus 3.5 number. Both these teams have had issues lately. It's going to be a raucous home court environment. UConn needs this game for seeding implications. Marquette probably locked outside the protected seed range at this point. But we'll see where this comes in through the day. It's another one where I'm hesitating, like the Maryland game, where I could see the home team taking some late money. So this will be another one we look to in Discord. Last game we'll talk about today, Xavier takes on Butler, and this about does it for our bubble teams. We have a lot of low-level games. They're mainly first and second rounds of the conference tournaments for the low and mid-majors, and then some of these teams wrapping up their regular seasons that aren't really live, like Stanford, Notre Dame, stuff like that. We'll talk about those on Twitter. Anyway, Xavier's a 1.5-point favorite over Butler. The total is 155.5. This is a rematch. These teams played on February 18th. Xavier won 76-63. They were at home. Butler only shot 26% from three, and Xavier forced 20 turnovers, capitalized on a lot of them. Resume-wise, the reason Xavier's on the bubble is they are 1-3 in the top 25. They have a 2-point road win against Marquette, which is propping them up. The slaughtering of Creighton certainly helped them this weekend, but Marquette is power rated as the top team in this conference metric-wise. Xavier does have 3 losses outside the top 50. TCU at 82, Georgetown at 83, and Villanova at 55. So they're still in the bubble. They need to continue winning games. If they close out the regular season without a loss and maybe win a game in the Big East tournament, I think this team is in. Butler is 0-6 against the top 25, but they held 5 of those 6 opponents to 10 points or fewer. This team has been awesome at playing close games and then finding a way to lose. They do have a pair of losses. They only have a pair of wins in the top 50 this year. So number 47, Northwestern, 32, Mississippi State. Those are the only teams they've beaten in the top 50. Couple losses outside the top 100 as well. Austin P at 269, 126 North Dakota State. Those are problematic. Butler would need to win the Big East to get in there. As far as this matchup, though, it's actually a little closer than I thought it would be when I dove into the efficiency metrics. Butler's 21st in effective height, 104th in rebounding. They play a really tall lineup. Both of these are technically an advantage over Xavier, who's 113th in effective height, 155th in rebounding. But Xavier's a well-coached team. I think their efficiency comes in streaks. I love their game plan against Creighton over the weekend. Kalkbrenner still got his, but they essentially forced Creighton to shoot over the top, who's not the best shooting team this year, despite public perception. Butler actually has better shooting metrics than Creighton, believe it or not. But still, Xavier's the better shooting team overall, and they're pretty well composed to beat teams like Creighton, who protects the rim and forces you to shoot threes. Xavier is 68th in effective field goal percentage, but 9th in three-point percent. They're 190th on the interior, but I think some of that is just noise. They have some awesome shooters, and Conwell, Maddox, and Foster all above 40%. Davion McKnight's not that far behind. And then that's all from three. Then you have Zach Fremantle on the inside. He missed a few games earlier this year, which I think is another reason why there might be room for improvement on their two-point percentage. But you look at Butler, this team is 43rd in three-point percentage, 73rd in effective field goal. Finley Bizjack and Patrick McCaffrey both at over 40% of their three-pointers. I still would rather have the Xavier guards over those two, but still, they're decent shooters. And then Jamil Telford's been awesome for this team. As far as defensively, Xavier outranks Butler by 100 spots exactly, 37 to 137. But both teams do have a weakness, both of them weaker inside. Xavier 164 there. Butler's 150th. So I do think you have better paths to victory with Xavier. A lot of their defensive efficiency is boosted by being 138th in turnovers forced, whereas Butler's 362nd. So that's a mismatch. It was a big mismatch in the first game where Xavier forced 20 turnovers. Right now, the spread actually has this exactly on a -1. In our model, at least, the Vegas spread, the actual spread is -1.5. So with us having value on Butler, it ends up just being a pause. And this is one I'm sort of IKBing, I know better, with Xavier just having the more talented roster and players. I think they can win this game on the road by more than the spread indicates. But anytime there's a discrepancy between my brain versus what the model says, trying to at least give it pause and evaluate it more throughout the day. Before we head out, if you or someone you know has a gambling problem, please call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. Must be 21 or older to play in most areas. We'll be back tomorrow breaking down more games. Hopefully we'll have more on Twitter. It's not the best slate. It's very top heavy. The top is elite. Make sure you have the eyes on, Florida, Bama, Tennessee, Missouri, all on the slate. They're not, not playing each other, but those teams are all playing awesome games. Marquette, UConn. And we'll be back tomorrow breaking down the rest of it. For more action or more breakdowns, head to Twitter @Matt_Gajewski. Otherwise, we will see you guys tomorrow, and good luck.